As I've talked about before, I was homeschooled from kindergarten through the end of high school. So starting college at 18 was like stepping into a foreign country. Everyone was the same age, but there was a gulf between us. I lacked the common experience, the shared language, and the unspoken cultural traditions that come with 12 years of traditional schooling, or at least 4 years of high school. I was at a fully residential college surrounded on 4 sides by farmland and rolling hills. When I started school, I didn't have a car or actually even a driver's license. If I wanted to go home, even though it was less than an hour away, I wasn't sure that my 1976 Schwinn Traveler could make the distance. This was all on purpose. In part, I wanted to escape the world that I was in and make it feel like I was further away from home than I actually was, but I also knew, even if I didn't speak it out loud, that I needed to keep myself locked on campus, at least to some degree. If I couldn't leave, then maybe I could stay long enough to become accustomed to this strange new way of life. I needed to keep myself from pushing away at the first sign of resistance, and resistance was coming. The transition for me from high school to college was not the same as everyone else. I wasn't dealing with the same struggles, and I didn't have the same stories that I could tell. I couldn't connect over experiences from high school because I didn't go to high school. In many ways, I felt like the opposite of my peers. Academics and time management were never an issue. I had a very clear direction for where I wanted to go with my life, which gave me purpose and it gave me fuel. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I wanted to be in a long-term relationship. I knew that from the first day, and that's still true now. Every decision I made was directed toward one of those two goals. I didn't see it as finding myself, just doing the work. My peers, on the other hand, didn't have the same sense of direction or time management skills, but they knew how to assimilate in large social groups. They knew how to be likable. They acted more mature. They appeared more put together, even if many of them were deeply lost. I wanted to make people laugh, I wanted to be likable, but I didn't really know how to do it. I was a scrawny, formerly homeschooled kid from a low-income household compared to my peers. My clothes and the way I acted didn't match what was expected in the pseudo-Ivy League environment I found myself in. My school is very pretentious, and actually at the time that was part of what I appreciated about it. But I felt like an outsider, and I wasn't sure how to fit in. Okay, I feel like in order to make any of this make sense, I have to give context to what my school was like. I went to Denison University. There were about 2,400 students in total, like 600 in my year. And the only reason I ended up there is because they gave me a fantastic scholarship deal. And they had an excellent film program, which is what I was studying. But a lot of the people that went there were wealthy, like really wealthy, like 19-year-olds driving around in Escalades and flying to New York for the weekend wealthy, like private jets and owning NFL teams wealthy. Not that like the friends that I had were necessarily in that camp, but those people existed. And in a class of 650 people, you start to know like who were the Nickelodeon stars as kids and whose dads owned Fortune 500 companies. That was the world that I was in. Now, as I've talked about before, my economic background was lower middle class. Like my mom stayed at home, my dad worked. We lived on probably $40,000 on a good year as a family of 5. We lived in a big beat up old house. We had one car that was always 15 years old. So that world that I was experiencing of extreme expendable income was brand new to me. I also didn't realize that I was in it because that's how you're spending every day. Like when it got cold out and everyone in the student union wore a Canada Goose coat, that was just normal. No one ever talked about money either. That was the most taboo thing you could say, but you could taste it. It was in the air and the way that certain groups of people seemed to cluster together. It was in the feeling that you got when you hung around someone. And the strange thing about people who are wealthy is that nobody actually thinks that they're wealthy because they always know someone who's richer than they are. Like we only have a small beach house compared to what my friends have. Or we only have a sailboat, but they have a yacht. So your parents might make more than $500,000 a year, but you're still the poor person in your friend group. I'd never spent that much time around a bunch of other people who were 18. In the homeschooling groups that we had, they would range from 6 years younger than me to my brother's age to a few years older than me. Before I started college, I didn't have any close friends who were exactly my age. I knew lots of people that were around my age, but I didn't have any close friends that were exactly my age. Suddenly, I was surrounded by 650 other 18-year-olds for the first time in my life. And that in and of itself was such a bizarre experience that I just kind of folded it all together. Like, I don't know what was weird because that was my first experience of large social groups, and I don't know what was weird because I was around people, many of whom were extremely wealthy. Okay, I think you have a clearer picture now of what Denison was. The first month of college is craziness. Everyone wants to be friends with everyone else. My university did immense work just to try to bring people together. The way the freshman orientation was set up, there were all sorts of events just to kind of glue that freshman class together as a single cohort. Party, get to know each other, like this is all about having a good time. This is all about connecting. But throughout this, I discovered a strategy for actually finding people I enjoyed spending time with and people I wanted to be friends with. We had big residential dining halls where almost everyone ate. And for that first week, it was just freshmen on campus. And so all of the dining halls are full of just our freshman class. If I didn't know anyone, I would go up to a group of people that looked interesting and just ask, hey, can I sit here? And I would sit down with that group of people and start talking. I found that the best way to connect with anyone was over a meal. There were so many people I would sit down with and we would strike up a conversation. We both have a plate of food in front of us. There's a certain amount of time we're gonna be sitting there. And there's enough sort of individual starter questions that you're expected to ask in these scenarios. Where are you from? What do you want your major to be? What brought you to this school? There's a little bit of a script that you start going through. At one point, I had been doing this so many times, I started introducing myself as, hi, my name is Mishak, it rhymes with Shake Shack. And sometimes they wouldn't go very well, right? You'd have a couple of one-off conversations, realize you didn't really have any chemistry, fill the rest of the conversation with boring, small talk, weather, whatever, and then move on, never to talk to each other again. But some of these conversations led to some of the best friends that I had throughout college. I don't really enjoy playing sports with people or playing video games. I enjoy having conversations, sitting down and talking to people about who they are. And so that was my goal, to really talk to everyone and get to know everyone and see who I wanted to be friends with. One of the things that I learned quite quickly is that I couldn't hide the fact that I was homeschooled. People would ask me where I went to high school within the first 30 seconds of meeting them. But I couldn't simply say I was homeschooled. People have all of these conceptions about what homeschooling is. Many of them just from the movies and TV shows that they've seen. A lot of people have never met anyone who was homeschooled. And so for me to say, hey, I'm homeschooled, it conjures up like the worst images that they've seen. I found that I was able to elaborate on my experiences without discounting them. It would have been easy to say, I was homeschooled, but hold on, let me tell you all the things about me that are normal so you'll like me. Instead, I really tried to lean on, I was homeschooled and I did all of these things. I told them about the pizza restaurant and the movies that I made. I talked about the experiences I had going to community college and high school, the books I read, the movies I watched, and what we did as a family homeschooling. This is where I found that people were actually interested, that they wanted to hear what I had to say. Now, people freshman year talk a lot about high school. It's sort of this shared common trauma, if you will, that everyone collectively experienced, except of course for me and anyone else who was homeschooled. So people are constantly talking about high school. They're talking about how terrible it was. They're talking about their prom. They're talking about kids from their high school. They're telling stories about crazy things that happened in high school. And I used to try to assimilate to some degree to those stories. I used to try to give some analogy of a story of my own that sort of fit. But over time, I found that that just wasn't genuine. I didn't actually have experiences that matched anything close to the prom that they went to. And so instead, I found that I could ask questions. I could ask about what those experiences were like, sure, but I could also ask more deeply about who they were. I think that people talked about high school because they wanted something to talk about. They wanted to be able to share a common experience. But I found I could ask people about what excited them, what invigorated them, what they were looking forward to, what they regretted in their life, shared human experiences that we had had. So maybe we both didn't go to high school, but we both have things that we're afraid of. Maybe we both didn't go to high school, but we can talk about our relationship with our parents. And it was through doing that that I was actually able to connect with people. Humans have a phenomenal bullshit detector, and me kind of like nodding my head along as people are talking about their high school experiences just felt fake. I wasn't adding anything to the conversation. I literally couldn't. Anything I did say was just generic. So I could ask questions and I could go deeper. And I found that when I did ask those questions and when I did go deeper, I would end up having longer, more in-depth conversations with people. And through those conversations, we would really get to know each other. That's how I made most of my friends. I still felt different. I still felt like an outsider. Yes, absolutely. But we could still connect. Before starting college, I never had a drop of alcohol. My parents stopped drinking in the late 90s, and so there was never alcohol in our house. We would host these big parties when I was a kid, but they were all alcohol-free, which looking back is so radical, I kind of absolutely love it. As a kid, I would dance and party all the time, but never with alcohol. Now at college, there was alcohol. I remember at first being very nervous about it, and I think probably rightfully so. I never had any experiences with it. As a kid, I wasn't around people who were drinking, like hardly ever. Most of my my parents' friends didn't drink. And so it was a rather new environment to be in. But I also knew that I was in college. These were experiences I wanted to have, and they were also experiences that I knew were somewhat expected. My parents weren't gonna be disappointed that I went to a party. They 100% knew that was what was happening. Freshman year parties are a different beast. Now I think for many people, especially those that are more shy, especially those like me who hadn't experienced that, it can feel really scary to go into a party. And yes, absolutely, there's a certain level of danger, like you should go with your friends, like you should be safe. But I also think it's important that you go, and this is why. A huge social component to college is not just parties, but everything that surrounds parties. So there's the getting ready for the party, which looks very different from a guy's group to a girl's group. Then there's the experience after the party, where people are drunk and hanging out in the common room or outside or just with friends in a dorm. And then there's the next day, sitting at brunch in the cafeteria, hungover, nursing a cup of coffee, and talking about how crazy last night was. On top of that, parties serve as a way for people to connect. Throughout their experiences, people talk about parties. Even to this day, my friends and I will talk about some of the crazy parties that we went to and some of the crazy experiences that we had. Look, everyone, I know we're probably inflating them a little bit for dramatic effect, but it wasn't just the act of the actual party itself, which was fun on its own. It was everything else that went around that. By going to parties, I would recognize people that I hadn't talked to before, and we would end up hitting it off with some wild conversation. There's a level of inhibition in the air, even if you're not drinking that much, where people are just much more open, much more willing to talk to each other. As a friend group freshman year, we would get ready and go out and go to these parties and just have an absolute blast. I don't think any of us really actually ever hooked up with anyone, even if that was people's intention, but we hung out as friends and we got drunk together and we laughed together, and it helped us bond and connect. And that was an experience that was really only available to me freshman year. At my school, they would rush for fraternities the second semester of freshman year. So basically first semester is open to everyone, and by that second semester, you have to be rushing the fraternities to actually go to those parties. You can go to other parties and other events, but those really kind of like big classic college parties were really only available in that first semester. I had no interest in being in a fraternity, but it was really fun to experience that for that first semester, and it was something I felt like I could be a part of, if only briefly. Now, coming out of homeschooling, I hadn't really dated. I don't think I'd had a girlfriend that had lasted longer than 2 weeks. I was green. I was really green. So going into college, dating was a brand new experience for me. In part, I felt confident just because I was in a new place and I wasn't held back to the previous experiences I'd had in my life. I'd also been dealing with acne that summer, and magically, as I started school, my entire face cleared up, and so I just felt like this amazing well of confidence within me. At least freshman year, I didn't participate in the hookup culture on campus, in part because I didn't know how to. I knew how to ask girls out. I was very like old school. I just like asked girls out, and we like went out for coffee or for lunch and sat down and talked to each other and got to know each other. Many of them, it was just really nice, never led to anything else. But some of them actually led to dating experiences. I found that going into the experience, I knew what I wanted, which was I wanted a girlfriend. I wanted a long-term relationship. I wasn't looking for a hookup. I wasn't looking for something casual. I was looking for something serious. And most of the other freshmen around me were not. Like, they were looking for much more casual things. And so many of the people that I went out with, it was just evidently clear, probably much more to them than it was to me, that it wasn't gonna work out. In almost all of the cases, they were the ones who broke things off with me after a date or two. And also because I didn't have a lot of experience, everything felt big. Like, not just sex or anything, but even like holding someone's hand or like getting to second base. Like looking back on it, I laugh at myself, but all of that felt like such a big deal. And there was a girl I met at a party. She was drunk, I was drunk. And like, this was my move. I would ask them to go out on a date with me, have them put their number in my phone, and I would text them, and then the next day I would follow up. So the next day I follow up with her, and you know, she like barely remembers who I was the night before, but you know, agrees, like says, yeah, hey, let's go out. Like, this will be fun. We end up going out, but just like staying on campus and talking and getting to know each other. Eventually we end up in the library and we're like, who can we like stay in here after they shut it down? Which we managed to figure out how to do. Like we hide in this back study room as they're making the closing announcements, and they turn off all the lights in the library. It's this massive library. So we're like well hidden. We're watching like a pirated version of The Empire Strikes Back because she's never seen The Empire Strikes Back. So of course I'm like making her watch Star Wars. Like, what's wrong with me? But anyway, we start making out and I just feel this like clink, like our teeth are touching, and she like pulls back and she goes, have you never made out with anyone before? And I pause for a second, and like I'd kissed people before, but I realized in that moment I was like, oh, maybe not, because we're in the library. There's like a whiteboard next to us and dry erase markers, and she makes a big line down the middle of the board. She writes, do and don't. And I remember she looks at me, she goes, I'm not gonna have sex with you tonight, but I'm gonna teach you how to make out. And so in the dark back room of the library, this very sweet girl taught me how to make out. And after that, we parted ways and smiled to each other when we saw each other on the quad. But I learned, I think, through that to sort of roll with the punches. Like, I knew that I was less experienced. And there were people around me who had less experience than I did. But I certainly presented as having less experience, and I wasn't really embarrassed that I had less experience. I had a pretty good excuse. I was like, look, I didn't go to high school. I wasn't around a bunch of people. I didn't have these opportunities, so I'm having them now. And almost everyone was pretty chill about it. And through all of this also, what I learned is like, yes, I had a lot of catching up to do. I wasn't at the same place that everyone else was. But I was also a pretty fast learner. Like within a couple of weeks, I was able to make friends and connect with people and go out with girls and make out with them in libraries. And even though still I didn't feel like I fit in necessarily, like I didn't have all of the experiences that everyone had had leading up to this, I was certainly able to make it work, and I had advantages over other people. I think in part because I was homeschooled, and in part because I had spent 2 years going to community college prior to starting at my university. The academic side of things was never an issue. So first, from a time management perspective, being homeschooled, I had to manage all of my own time. Throughout high school, my parents would give me assignments for what they wanted done over the next month. It was up to me to break that into chunks, get it done on a weekly basis, show them that I was making progress on it, and have the thing finished when it needed to be finished. Because of that, college was a breeze. In many ways, it was easier even because professors were giving me more of a breakdown. They were saying, you need to read this number of pages by each day. You need to make sure that this paper is written by this point. In some ways, I felt this relief of responsibility because I could just look at the syllabus and map that into my calendar and say, okay, I know exactly what I need to get done at this point, and if I just knock these things out, then I can get a good grade. Now, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were certainly places where I did struggle, but I also knew going into college that I wanted to do film. So my first semester, I wasn't on a pre-med course. A couple of years later, I ended up taking chemistry just to make sure that I still had some scientific chops on me, which I passed just fine. But for the most part, I was taking humanities classes, which required a lot of paying attention, a lot of reading, a lot of synthesizing of information, all of which was stuff that I had done in homeschool. On the other hand, having gone to community college for 2 years prior, I'd also become a relatively good writer. I wasn't as good as some of the people I was around, for sure, but I certainly could put my ideas together on a page. Having been able to write at an A+ at the community college level translated to like a B-ish at the college I was at, which meant that there wasn't that big of a skill jump I needed in order to improve. In many ways, I felt like I had an academic advantage over my peers, where they maybe had a social advantage over me. And in some ways, it felt like this trade-off where I was never academically stressed, but always a little socially stressed. And I think that everyone else was, less socially stressed, but much more academically stressed. Looking back, I think the transition between homeschooling and college was abrupt. It felt like I was thrown immediately into this fire of being on campus and being around a bunch of people. And at the same time, I only know what my college experience was like. I didn't inhabit any of the minds of the other people that I was around. I can only observe from the outside. And it very well may be the case that many of them felt the same things that I felt, even though they went through a much more traditional schooling program. Looking back on it, I don't know if I wish I had gone to high school or not. I got an enormous edge out of being able to make movies and TV shows throughout high school. Like, that was amazing. But on the other hand, there were people who had this great social advantage over where I was because they had spent 4 years in high school. I think for some people who are homeschooled, it is a better fit to go to high school before you go to college. And for others, it isn't. I've seen it work very well both ways. Like anything, there's never gonna be a one-size-fits-all, and at the end of the day, the only real question is, are you happy with where you are now? And when I look back at my life, I am. I'm happy with the friends that I made and the lessons that I learned, and it wasn't perfect. College by no means was perfect. And there's a lot that I'm honestly still unwinding from that experience. 4 years, there's probably only 2 or 3 people that I still talk to from college. But I grew a lot. And if I look at myself, even by the end of freshman year, I was a little less scrawny, my voice had dropped a little bit more, my clothes fit a little better, my jeans were still definitely too skinny. But I knew how to assimilate in a group of people, I knew how to make friends, I had a driver's license, a cell phone plan, and a girlfriend. I felt like I had my life much more together. Like I learned it all. All of the stuff that maybe one would learn in high school, I was able to learn in college. Now, at the beginning of my sophomore year, I did end up breaking up with that girlfriend, and I felt probably like every 19-year-old guy does when he loses the first love of his life, that everything is over. I ended up going to my advisor, who was the dean of students at the time. And I sat in his office and just told him what was happening. And he looked at me and he said, Mishak, people say college is supposed to be the best 4 years of your life. He shook his head and he said, I've never found that to be true. He said, it's 4 years, yes, but they're 4 long, hard years where you learn a lot. And when I look back, I don't think those will be the best 4 years of my life, but they were 4 years where I learned a lot. So that was my experience transitioning from homeschool to college. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. I'll see you guys next time.